we took the Manhattan Borough President's template that Gail had worked on with a huge group for several years. We used that as our starting point, and we went through it section by section very carefully to make any changes we thought were appropriate. And what I've done since the last meeting, I think I've told some of you individually, but what we've done since the last meeting is I went back to our CB7 current bylaws, and I made sure that anything that was missing in the borough president has been transferred. And I'll give you a good example. Barbara just brought it to attention. 3H4, it's a 6-year term limit for standing committee co-chairs. That was something that was added as an amendment, I think, in 2019 by a special vote. And so that's not in the borough president's bylaws. That's something that CB7 felt strongly about. So I've added that to our draft.
Good, thank you.
It's a great example, yeah. Thanks, Barbara. So I did is I went through CB7, and then I did something else, which you'll all be surprised and touched to hear about. Do you remember back 100 years ago, I asked everybody to take a look at the bylaws for a couple different community boards in Manhattan and write down any notes? Okay, I actually went back and consulted all those. Great job, everybody. And I also went to ones we hadn't covered, and I went to look through each of the other 11 community boards in Manhattan to take a look and see what things might be there that might be useful for us that we might want to adopt. And probably the most creative one of those is the election every other year suggestion. So I've incorporated that in. What I'd like to do today is just focus not on the screen and sharing the actual document, because that sort of gets us in the weeds and like wordsmithing. I'd like to do is just go down a list of 13 different topics and make sure we all have a consensus on these and how we want to handle them, if that's okay. And then just so you know, the process going forward, my hope, my fervent hope, is that we will come to a consensus on all of these issues today efficiently. And then I will weave everything into the draft. I will send the draft back out by the end of this weekend. And then ideally we'll have another meeting next week or the week after, either before or after Passover, and which will get us in good shape to do a presentation at the full board. Actually, will get us in good shape to have a vote and at our committee to recommend the bylaws in a resolution and move it forward to full board. Before the full board meeting, we'll send it out like any resolution with all the backup materials, which would be the bylaws. People can take a look at it. I'm also today going to send out yet another request. I think, morning, Bev. Thanks for joining us. It'll be I think the 4th request for the full board to have any input if they want it. Unfortunately, we've only gotten input from Bev. Thank you for joining us. Not from anybody else. There's no limit on the number of suggestions people can make. Although I think somebody has suggested that we had said that. That's not true. There's no limit to the number of suggestions you can make. And we're open to input from everybody. So I'm hoping that we'll get some of that. And then we'll hopefully get this approved in May. So that's the plan going forward. Any questions? Okay, plowing onward. And for those of you who joined late, I just wanted to mention again how much I hate being on camera. I mentioned to those who got here early, but I really hate it. So bear with me. All right, the first thing is, and some of these are just things that might not necessarily be in the bylaws. Just wanted to get some feedback on this and see if we can come to a consensus on it. The first thing is attendance monitoring. That's in 2C2. It mentions attendance monitoring, and I know right now, Bev, that falls to you and Decima. It falls to the co-secretaries to do the attendance monitoring. And the question is, I think Natasha, you brought this up the other night, or I did. How do we address this issue of on-screen versus off-screen time? So let's say let's say I log on at 6:30 for a meeting, and then it's time to walk my dog, it's time to wash my car, it's time to do whatever, and my picture goes off, and then at about 10:30 I wander back over to the computer and I log off. So how do we address that issue in terms of attendance, assuming that we might have a hybrid mode going forward? Any thoughts on this? Who should monitor it? How do we do it? And Bev, I'd love to hear from you first, since you're in that awkward spot, and I know we've had separate conversations about how you and Seema find this a challenge. So you want to unmute and tell us what you think? Makes sense.
Yeah, it is. There are many what we've basically defaulted to is that if anyone shows up during the meeting, since we really don't have guidance, we count them as present. That can mean that at a full board, somebody shows up at 9 o'clock frequently. It can mean that people who are there at 6:30 leave by 8. So it's highly uncharacteristic of what the actual attendance is, what you see on our minutes.
Right.
And I don't believe that that's what our board members are committed to do. So I would like to see some kind of standard against which the secretaries can, in fact, take attendance, because right now there is none. And I'm unsympathetic with people who do not wish to have video showing when they're in a remote location. And I really think they should leave the camera on. That's
Agreed.
you.
There are about 3 or 4 other, this is, by the way, this is my cheat sheet. This is a spreadsheet I did of every one of the 12 boards in Manhattan. I took a look at roll call, whether they have initial and final, whether they have a treasurer, standing committee list, attendance, time limits, chair term limits, blah, blah, blah. I took a look at various things that are, it's sort of in my own code, so I didn't share it because it's, I think nobody else will be able to understand this, how I did this. But there are many, many different ways to approach this. And I know we've spoken before about having an initial and a final roll call. And we agreed not to do that because we thought it'd be very controversial. As just not as a vote, but as a consensus, do we feel like that's something we might want to revisit?
Susan, didn't Mark Diller make a suggestion about something that he's experienced at some other city agencies or somewhere else where there's a code or something that's flashed on the screen, maybe not once, but maybe 2 or 3 times, and then you're supposed to, like if you're actually there, if you're paying attention, then you're supposed to note down that code and send it off to someone.
Yeah, he did. He's talked about that in terms of continuing education for the law. It's called PLI, I think. Max, is that something you've ever seen done? Is that something we could do?
My environmental law class in grad school, but outside of that, no. The unfortunate thing is, you can imagine a scenario where, someone texts their close friend on the board, "Hey, what was that code?" But we could certainly do that during the meetings. From a "are we able to" perspective, we could do that. That's, yeah.
Natasha, can you turn your volume up a tiny bit? It might be me, but
No, it's me too.
Okay.
You're very low.
Calling on people by how they raise their hands, or can we just chime in?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Tell me what the procedure is.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for reminding me. I'll go back to hand calling. Jay?
Thank you. First of all, it's not called PLI. That's the Practicing Law Institute. It's called CLE. Continue.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. We're going to try to be brief today.
I've probably said this before. My basic feeling is that we should not be constructing bylaws dealing with the current suspension of the open meetings law by emergency proclamation. That what we should be presenting are bylaws that govern what the normal procedures were before the suspension of the law. That being said, the problem of attendance as it relates to being there at the beginning of the meeting and not being there at the end of the meeting has been one that's existed forever. We've discussed and debated what we should do about people who come to the in-person meetings and an hour or an hour and a half late, and more often than not, people who come at the beginning of the meeting and leave, an hour before the meeting's over. So in either instance, to my mind, the only solution is a roll call / attendance at the beginning and end. The problem with being on the screen or not being on the screen, hopefully it's temporary and we shouldn't be dealing with it.
Yeah, we have worked very hard not to address any of this specifically. Certainly, there are many reasons the bylaws need to be updated. I'll give you a fine example. We've never before had a chair step down midterm. There were the provisions for that were scant. So we're not tailoring this to Zoom or to any particular thing. The solutions that are possible here have nothing to do with Zoom or hybrid or in person. For example, the 2 things I can think of would be, and Barbara, I'll get to you in a second, would be initial and final roll call. And that's something that would be, many boards have done when they're in person. I mean, CB9 does that. That's the first time I ever saw that. I thought it was great. But I think that might be controversial for our board. The other thing we could do, Bev, is we could say, take a look at the votes. I mean, I've watched this. I'm sure you guys have too. At the beginning, you got 42-0 to 0 to 0. At the end, you got 29-3 to 1. And there's obviously a drop off. Now, that doesn't cover the fact that we have the community session at the end. And the community session is an important part of the community board. So that's why a initial and final roll call might be important. But Barbara, you want to go ahead? And so Jay, neither of those options has anything to do with whether you're in the room altogether or you're not. And one last thing, when we were in the room altogether, I noticed people who would go and sign in, at 9 o'clock and leave. And then when the attendance sheet was collected, they were there as if they had been there for the whole meeting. They also could come in late and sign in because nobody was monitoring that. So Max, when we do go back into person, I would suggest strongly that somebody from the office is there with the sheet, watching and putting in the time when people do sign in and sign out.
Yeah, I plan on being there for almost all in-person meetings once we return.
Yeah, thanks. Barbara?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to a few things. First of all, we've used Zoom extremely well for the last year and a half. It's a relatively new technology, which everybody has incorporated. I think it would be a mistake not to have parameters in our bylaws to accommodate for it. When we are online, I think that one of the things, in addition to what Bev said, is that there should be a business decorum, and people should be on a business behavior. That means don't eat your dinner, don't drink your glass of wine, and don't get up and walk around, as many people do. And in terms of a final roll call, I pretty much have thought this out. At first, I was in favor of it, but now I'm not in favor of it because I really don't think that it solves any of the issues. Somebody can still get on for 10 minutes at the end of a 3-hour meeting, be listening with one ear and then say, here, present. So I don't think that really accomplishes what we need. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Max, can you lower the hands after people have spoken? I don't have the ability, or make me co-host so I can do it. Thanks. Bev?
We'll do both.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Hi. I was wondering whether there's discussion of whether or not we would move to a more electronic basis for in-person meetings as well as for remote or blended meetings. And I don't know that those decisions have been made. But assuming that everyone was there with an iPad or some kind of device in front of them, whether they're remote or whether they're in the office or at the site of a full board meeting, is there an electronic way of essentially registering attendance during the meeting that would be something that required a proactive action on the part of the board member?
Max, do you want to?
Question.
Yeah, Max, you want to?
Sure. I don't actually know. I mean, I'm sure there's something we could do and figure out. But what that is, I couldn't quite think in my head right yet.
So maybe Max and I should talk to Jerry about this. That's a great idea, Bev. Because that would be something like, on your voting sheet, I'm sure there's some timestamp of when you log in and when you, because that's another thing. It's like right now you can just fill in your whole voting sheet and submit it. And I'm sure Jerry can tell in the code, when it was done. So I'll talk to Jerry and Max about that. Okay.
And actually that reminds me, I'll add at CB8, we would get a little, like a printout Excel from Zoom who registered for the meeting, but unfortunately it was limited to when you registered. So if you were one of those people that takes the link a week in advance when we send them, that's when it was logged, unless you then went to re-register again right before the meeting. But it just, there's a lot of inaccuracy potentially.
Okay, Natasha?
Yeah, I agree that there could be potential for a lot of inaccuracy. For instance, I often don't fill out the whole sheet that evening, and sometimes I have it open, I filled out like half of it, and then I'll remember the next morning and I'll fill it out and then send it in, like actually the next morning. So that would imply that I've been on the call all, all night or something. Or like I could have my computer on the whole time and be logged into Zoom and just, like Barbara said, just be listening with one ear, not be paying attention. I guess there's no real solution that we're coming up with right now. It just seems
Okay.
like everything is subject to so much abuse that.
Okay, so I think the one thing we need to have consensus on right now then is whether or not we want to advocate for initial and final roll call. And I think it sounds like we do not. Is that correct? Yeah. Anybody strongly in favor of initial and final roll call? No. No? Anybody? Okay.
I'm in favor of it, but I understand the impracticalities of it, and I don't know how we deal with it.
Okay, so we'll just put a pin in this and we'll move on. Okay, so the next thing is 3G1, steering to include standing committee co-chairs and task force co-chairs. Right now, it's just the standing committee co-chairs, and I'm proposing that we would add the task force co-chairs to that as well. I don't think that's controversial. Anybody have a view against that? Going once, twice, three times. Rich, you okay with that? Our guest attendee? Okay. Number 3H1, all members are appointed. Oh, this is interesting. Right now, this is all over the map in different boards. And the topic here is what the requirement is for your participation on the board. And so what we're proposing and what's in there right now is that all members need to be appointed to at least 2 standing committees, or be an executive officer, or be a co-chair of a standing committee. Certainly you can be on more than them. I mean, right now, for some bizarre reason, I'm on 3 standing committees. I co-chair this task force, and I'm on 2 other task forces. That's ridiculous. I'm going to whittle that back. But you're only required to be on either 2 standing committees, be an executive committee member, or a co-chair of a standing committee. Does everybody agree with that? That should be our minimum requirement.
Isn't that a requirement imposed by the borough president's office? 2 committees?
It's not actually.
Okay.
So is everyone okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, that seems reasonable to me. The next one was a pretty easy vote, and most boards do this. 3H2, no meetings in July or August. We would get rid of the July meeting as well as the August meeting. Anybody want to meet in July?
Yes.
You do?
No, definitely not.
Is this
So you're outnumbered.
for the full board as well as standing
Yes.
committees?
Yes,
Okay,
everything.
yeah.
I mean, on this one, let me just tell you quickly, July, the only other boards that meet in July, Board 1 has got a combined July and August meeting, so they do. 2 does, we do, and that's it. So we are one of only 2 boards that meet in July. So is everyone okay with that?
Yeah, Susan, this actually exists in 3G1A in the BP bylaws, so it's not necessary to add it again from the CB7 bylaws.
Sure, but I just want to be clear with everybody that we're making this change. This is pretty big. I want to make sure that everyone's okay with it. But do you think that that's a mistake, Barbara? To highlight it? Do you think that's a mistake to highlight it? I think it'd be better to bring that to everyone's attention.
But,
I
Susan,
think we, something we need to point out to people, yeah.
Okay, fine, okay. Question,
Susan,
Rich?
this is a somewhat limited circumstance, but because of the juxtaposition of meetings with LPC, the Preservation Committee, and that was instituted when.
Yes, I know. We've covered this a lot. There's a
Can
provision.
I finish my sentence?
Yeah.
That maybe we should add a sentence. My concern would be, and while it may be unlikely, that if that continues, which I expect it will, then somebody or multiple people could invoke the bylaws as a reason why they don't have to attend the committee meetings. And, you might want to think about some sentence indicating that under certain circumstances, a committee may have the option to schedule meetings in
Okay.
July and August.
Okay. duly noted. Rich, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a comment. I think overall, we're here to serve the community. And if we don't meet in July or August, it means that any committee meeting that happens after full board in June can't pass a resolution until September. So we're going pretty much a quarter of the year where we're not able to act on anything if we don't meet in July. And already we only have 11 meetings a year for each committee to get anything done. And there's a lot we should be doing, especially in important issues like transportation or even preservation. And for us to not meet in July is just really abdicating what we should be doing. I think in terms of the other stuff, I'm less worried about whether people show up and have their camera on at meetings. I think it's a matter of whether you're serving the community. And there are people who are very actively working on behalf of the board on any number of issues, but might have conflicts with some of the meetings. And I think in terms, we don't need to be the attendance police. It's not kindergarten. We can see who's contributing and who's not. But we want to make sure that people are contributing. And so I think even requiring 2 standing committees, it could be excessive if people are contributing in other ways. The ultimate measure is, are people serving the community? Not are they showing up at meetings, not are they sitting on a certain number of standing committees. But I do think that relative to this issue, we have to meet in July, or else we're just taking off way too much of the year and not being able to get too much done during a critical part of the year.
Yeah, that's a good point, Rich. As far as being attendance police, the one specific metric that the borough president's office uses for renewals is the data of whether or not you're attending, because you are required to attend meetings. So certainly people can contribute in other ways. I know a lot of us do a lot of work when we're not at a meeting, but I think that the attendance is a data-driven, specific, objective metric of that we can't dispense with. As far as not meeting in July, there's a provision that the executive committee can meet. And so if the preservation committee needs to meet, for example, in July, which would not be out of the realm, and I'm on preservation, we've met in July and in August. It's something you understand when you're on preservation, then the executive committee can ratify that. And then in September, when we come back, if there's any issue, it can be overturned. So I think there's a mechanism to address that.
Can I respond to both those?
Excuse me?
Can I respond to both those?
Briefly, we don't really.
Forget.
Okay. Bev?
I would love to see some language that made a July meeting optional, dependent on workload. I don't know if that's appropriate for a bylaw structure, but something that in fact was permissive, so that we weren't in a situation where there had to be meetings and members would say, oh, well, the bylaws say we don't meet in July, so we can't do it. I just think there needs to be some kind of loophole that permits a July meeting for cause where there really is a need for action to be taken.
Are you thinking on the committee level or on the full board level?
I think it's both, really, because individual committees may have work they need to do, and the full board may need to ratify certain resolutions that come out of committees. So I just think it should be, okay, the norm would be no meeting in July, perhaps, to conform to what other boards do, but that there be some kind of language that would permit and encourage meetings if there were cause for holding them.
Okay.
I think that's a good idea, but I agree with Rich.
Excuse me.
Barbara? Jay, can you hold on?
me.
Barbara's got her hand raised.
A while ago, I went through all 12 community boards, and I believe that with Community Board 7, and there was only one other board that actually had a meeting in July or August.
It's board 1.
But what? I don't remember now. If you want,
Barbara,
I'll be
I'm telling
happy.
you. Barbara, I looked, I'm telling you, it's board 1. I'm backing you up.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, so that's one thing. Also, from my longtime experience on this board, going back to my first iteration here, 22 years, we often had meetings, committee meetings were convened in July or August, depending on the need. And we would send in to LPC, for instance, a committee vote. And that's perfectly acceptable, you know, if that's all you've got. And everybody knows that we're a volunteer body. And, you know, we take some time off. So I don't see why we have to stand out as one of, you know, 2 boards out of 12 that don't take any time off.
Great, thanks. Max?
I thought Rich's original point was good. You know, the committees that meet in June after full board, you know, might need the next full board in July. And I had an idea, but actually I liked Bev's idea better. I was going to say, because, you know, when I got to CB7, I thought it was actually fairly strange that we have full board at the start of the month and it's to approve the previous month's. Because at CB8, we have full board at the end of the month, and then it wipes away all of the committee's meetings from earlier in that same month. And I thought that my initial thought was, oh, well, maybe we could just always reschedule full board in the month of June to fall towards the end of the month. But maybe Bev's provision of, you know, making it optional in July is actually a better thought than mine.
Okay, Jay?
Yeah, I agree with Rich. I don't think we should, in the bylaws, exclude a July meeting. Barbara's correct about preservation, and we have a handshake agreement with LPC to accept our committee resolutions if the anomalies of the calendars don't jive. And so that's really not an issue. And as to making it optional, the fact is that certain committees that are application driven and in relation to city agencies like preservation, land use, sometimes BCI and so forth, there's nothing that prevents the option of the committee co-chairs or the members of the committee calling a meeting in July and August if the calendar demands it. But so I think as far as codifying it in the bylaws, I agree with Rich, we shouldn't exclude July. And the fact that maybe only one other board does it. In fact, Community Board 1 is one of the more active boards, Lower Manhattan. And, you know, if our community demands it, and I think it does, I agree we shouldn't exclude it.
Okay, great. So I'll take all this into consideration. These are all great points, and I'll try to weave something in. So when you get the revised version, take a careful look at it. Okay, so the next one is 3H4, the 6-year term limit for standing committee co-chairs. This is something that was, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, was voted on as a special amendment to the bylaws in 2019. And so even though we have as Jay points out, we have the new Max, can you lower people's hands when they're not, after they've asked their question? Thanks. Even though there's a new term limits for community board members, I think we should leave this in because that's still in effect. So, you know, right now somebody could have been co-chair for 6 years and this was voted on duly. And so I think we should keep this in. Yes, Jay, you have a question briefly.
Well, I think we need to tailor the language because going forward, as I think I mentioned, certainly anybody, as the board turns over, in order for the 6-year limitation on co-chairing a committee to be relevant, right now, anybody coming on the board can only be on for 8 years. And to be subject to a 6-year term limit, you'd have to be appointed co-chair of a committee in your first 2 years to have it make any sense. So I just, I think at this point, either you've got to tailor the language or I think we could eliminate it. Because even if we don't have it, anyone who's been on is going to be off at some point, and the turnover would then take care of it. So you're muted, Susan.
sorry. Thank you, the phone rang in the room. I lifted this in whole cloth because it had been worked on so hard. And so I will tailor that. Thank you. Can you lower the hand there, Max? Great, thanks. The next one is 3H5, standing committee dissolved only with a majority vote at steering. And this is something that is new to the borough president does not have this, and we did not have this in our current bylaws. And I know this is a controversial thing that you could call the HHS provision when there was an effort to just for the chair to unilaterally dissolve a standing committee, and there was some concern about that. So this seems like a safe, good provision. Is there anybody have any concerns about this? It's a new thing.
Well, I said.
Hands raised, please. I'm sorry, Jay. I've got to try to keep this.
Okay.
Jay?
Now that my hand is up, I can talk. Yeah, I had sent a memo around that I wrote a couple of years ago after that incident with the HHS committee, and there were two aspects for it. Number one, generally, Robert's rules, which we follow, mandates, although Robert's rules is advisory anyway, but typically, well, the rules state that you should list in your.
That's not the topic here. You're going to say about how the standing committee is listed?
Well, I think it's part of the treatment of committees. If you're limiting this question to whether the chair should have the unilateral authority to create or dissolve, is that what you're?
Yeah, this simply says the standing committees can be dissolved only at the initiation of the chair and with a majority vote at steering. That's the topic.
Okay,
it's not about whether or not you want to list the standing committees.
Okay, so advise me when that topic is
At the
come
end.
up, because it's not anywhere.
Okay, we'll talk about that at the end. So is there any other objection to this or any other thought on this one?
Well, I would prefer to have it by ratification of the full board rather than just the steering committee. But if the consensus is to have the steering committee approve any additional standing committees or dissolving of a standing committee, if the consensus is steering approval, that's fine.
Okay, great. Because steering is pretty large, and it certainly would at least afford the opportunity to the committee that's under threat to be there and to have a say. Natasha?
Is the committee in question going to get some notice?
That's a great question. I will put something in there. Thank you.
Come and, I don't know, present their own
Yeah.
side. It happened once at the Youth Education Libraries Committee.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. I'll put that in there. Okay, moving on. Any other? No. 3K, 3A6. Absences at the discretion of the board chair. So this has to do with absences, and there are a number of provisions for absences. Military duty, jury service, death of an immediate family member, blah blah blah. There's 5 of them, and then the last one is at the discretion of the board chair. And I think this is a great one. It's in there already. I just want to highlight because a couple of people commented. What about vacations? What about meetings that are moved because of holidays? And so that would allow for that. So that would give you coverage. For example, this month there are going to be 2 preservation meetings. I'm on preservation. What if I can't make it to both of them? It's suddenly plopped down on a day I had no expectation to be a meeting. So I think the discretion of the board chair would address that. Natasha, that was your concern. Are you comfortable? Okay. Any comments on that one? I don't think anybody would agree with that. The point here is some of the other boards list out actually planned vacation as a reason for legitimate excuse, and they also go into excused and non-excused absences. I don't think that's a good way to go. I think that gets back to Rich's point about attendance police, and that's not really helpful. Anybody? Okay. 3K, 3C, leave of absence. Now, Jay, I know you have thoughts on this one. Leave of absence, which is 3 months at the discretion of the chair, and it'll be approved at steering without any need to disclose the reason. And so this is a change because right now it's 3 months and it gets voted on at full board. My hope here is that if we move some of these things to steering, it will help speed up the full board. And also, I feel pretty strongly here that you should not need to disclose the reason. Maybe you want to require that it's for medical, it's for professional, but I think that's an invasion of privacy. I don't think it's anybody's business. Everybody's entitled to a 3-month leave of absence, period. And I don't see any reason why anyone should need to know why it is. Jay, go ahead, please be brief. We've already talked about this a lot.
I don't frankly understand the rationale why anybody should be allowed a leave of absence for any reason. That makes absolutely no sense to me. When you apply and are appointed to the community board, you undertake an obligation to attend meetings. And, I don't see why, if I think, gee, I'd love to take off April, May, and June, because I don't feel like going to meetings. I feel like spending 3 weeks in Alaska is a legitimate reason. I think I understand the concerns for privacy, and just a side note, I don't vote in favor of leaves of absence. I abstain because of the simple reason is that we don't know what we're voting on. We don't know what the chair has done, who grants the leaves. And I think some form of disclosure, even in very general terms, such as health, professional obligation, family, some brief explanation, and you might want to put some language in there about, maintaining, no disclosures which would compromise privacy. But, if the chair can do it and the rest of us don't know what the reason is, what are we voting on? Whether it's steering or full board, it makes no sense to me.
Okay, duly noted. Anybody else have a view on this?
Susan, if I may, this is an example of how, and you can save it for later, but how do you propose for this task force to make a final decision on what, are we going to vote on each section, which is what we did on the last task force? Or are we going to vote at the end of this discussion on your version of a final proposal? How is that going to work?
My plan is that in the next 1 or 2 meetings, we'll have a final version, and we'll have a vote on whether or not to present it to the full board, and hopefully have unanimous approval on that from the task force. I have to say that everybody's got some things that they don't like or they do like. I've got mine, and so sort of like pick and choose. And if there's one, right now we're at a stage where I'm trying to encourage people not to just do like teeny tiny wordsmithing, because we've got a bigger document here. We've done a lot of good work, and I think it's important to say, okay, these are the things I really care deeply about. If they're in it, and I can live with this whole document. And that's the whole thing about collegiality and working together as a team. Not everybody gets what they want. So, this might be the one thing that you feel strongly about, Jay. Maybe you won't approve the bylaws because of it. Maybe there's other stuff.
What I'm concerned about, Susan, as I said, the last process was that each section was approved section by section by the task force. And if there are 2 or 3 substantive changes that members of the task force disagree with, then you're kind of putting it, you're putting members of the task force in the position where they, have to make a determination. It's one thing to say not everyone gets what they ask for, but there are a couple of serious substantive issues on the process governing this board that are important. And if we have right now we have a 5-person task force, which I've never been particularly comfortable about the size of it, but that's what we have. And I think if we don't vote on each section, then you're putting us in the position where we have to possibly, vote against the bylaws because we agree with 1 or 2 serious substantive issues. And I think you need to think about what we do as a final vote in terms of what we present to the full board.
I'll give that some thought, Jay. That's an interesting perspective. Barbara, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that this matter should be left up to the executive board. I do think that some needs should be stated, whether it be medical. I don't think you need to say I'm having a nervous breakdown or I'm having my stomach removed or something like that. I don't think that's anybody's business, but I do think that the executive board should handle it, and then the chair can just make an announcement and say that, so-and-so is taking a leave of absence. I think 3 months is a long time in most instances. I think maybe it should be a maximum of 2 months, or maybe not even 2 months, but yeah, I don't think it should go before the full board. And I think that to just say so-and-so wants to leave of absence with no reason is really pretty silly. I agree with Jay on that one.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in on this particular issue? Okay, so why don't I change this? So would people be comfortable? What's the consensus here? Would people be comfortable if I change this to the executive team and votes on this? And they're the ones who know about, I mean, the one thing I'll say is the executive teams know, I'm still not comfortable with any specifics being given. Because I just think it's nobody's business why you're taking time off. I have to say, personally, the process for applying is arduous. The renewal process is arduous. Once you're on the board, I don't think you should have to quit just because you have, a personal situation that prevents you, whether it's work or personal, whatever it is, whether you can't attend for 2 months. I don't know that the 2 months is enough. I'll take a look back at the borough president and see if it's 3 months or 2 months, and I'll get back to you guys, okay?
Well, Susan.
Yeah, your hand's raised again, yes?
Yeah, Susan, I hate to put it in these terms, but I disagree with you. I think someone who is going to take 3 months off their obligation to the board, I think it's everybody's business, not the details of why, but some kind of general verification that the reason for taking the leave of absence is a legitimate reason. I mean, I agree with Barbara. We don't know we don't need to know the details, but a simple pronouncement that whether it's, I'm comfortable with the steering committee approving it, but there should be some sort of simple statement that if it's for health reasons or professional reasons or family reasons, details aren't important. But again, you have an obligation.
Hey, Jay, I've heard it. You've got enough. I'm sorry, I'm losing a little bit of patience here because we got
Fine, and my final sentence is, unless you deal with this issue, I'm not going to vote to approve the bylaws.
Okay, fine. That's let me just say this. How are you going to make a determination? First of all, if somebody says to you, okay, you're not on steering, so would you be okay with it being voted on the steering?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So how would you propose that somebody at steering make a determination whether or not to vote, whether or not it's legitimate, if it's just because they're saying it's medical, professional, or whatever? Why not just say you can take a leave of absence because of medical, professional, or personal reasons? So what more information is that giving you?
Well, okay, but that's not what you're proposing.
Well, but I'm saying to you, it's not giving a reason. So why do you need any sort of category? What difference does it make? They're taking a leave of absence.
Well, there's a big difference between saying, you can take a leave of absence for any reason and saying you can take a leave of absence for medical, professional, or health reasons.
All right, fine. So we'll put in medical, personal, or professional reasons.
Not personal.
So then how would you?
Personal is anything. Personal is I don't feel like it during the warm months.
Jay, I think you're being, Jay, I'd like to take this down like 6 notches.
You don't want to prolong this. That's my opinion.
No, I'd like to take this down like 10 notches, okay? I don't see that this is the most important thing in the bylaws. What I'm trying to suggest is that it's not really anybody's business why someone's taking a leave of absence. Let's break it down to the components. The first one is how much time? Can we get a consensus on that? 2 months or 3 months?
I don't have any problem with 3 months.
Who had the problem with 3 months? I thought you did, Jay. Anybody else?
Barbara
Barbara,
did.
I did.
are you okay with 3 months?
I think 3 months is a long time.
So,
I mean, and we haven't discussed somebody who's running for office and whether they have.
I'm getting to that. That's my next topic.
That's a different issue.
It's a different issue. I'm getting that in a minute. So Barbara, so are you okay with 3 months or you insist on 2?
I'm certainly fine. Okay, fine.
Is everybody okay with 3 months then? Consensus? Okay, so 3 months. So we've discussed the term limit. The question is who should be voting on it? Is it full board, steering, or executive?
Executive.
Well, I would prefer full board, but I think steering is a reasonable compromise. It's more than
Okay.
just executive.
Okay.
committee.
Natasha, you've got your hand raised? Natasha? You're
You're
muted.
muted.
Oh, steering.
Okay.
You want steering?
Yes.
Yeah, I think steering is the best way to go. Okay, so the consensus seems to be steering. And then the final thing is, what should the, what kind of disclosure do we have on this? And what I'll propose here is that we have medical, personal, and professional. And I'll give some thought when we're not under the pressure of the Zoom camera to what other reasons there could be. And Jay, I'd like to ask for your indulgence on this, that if somebody's has some personal issue they don't want to disclose, I mean, you're not going to hear what the reason is anyway. So, I don't see what differences it makes what the categories are. At least you're putting in some parameters there. So it's like a middle ground. Can we try to, you're like, got your hands folded, like, you're like, no way. Like,
No, that's how I always say.
I know, but it comes across as like, no way.
Medical and professional. I'm just uncomfortable with personal because, I mean, I don't know if you have another category besides medical and professional, which I think we all agree are legitimate.
You know what, Jay? I'm not going to argue this any further. I don't want to have a discussion about whether somebody's leave of absence is legitimate. That's the thing I want to get away from. Let's talk separately about running for office, because if you're running for office, I think we need some provision here that if you're running for office, you should not be on the board. And the question just is, when should that be triggered? Is it when you first think, oh, I might want to run for office? And my suggestion on this would be once you file the paperwork. I think it's paperwork for financial aid or whatever it is, that you need to take a leave. But the problem with that is
you might want to look at the technical term for when a campaign is officially.
Yes, we will. Can we go back to the hand raise thing, please? Just to keep some order here. The problem is going to be that that's going to be more than a 3-month term. So that will mean that somebody then is stuck and needs to step down from the board. And I think that's a tough thing, but we have an issue here as far as I'm concerned, because if somebody's running for office, we had 2 people this past year who are running for office. It's not simply that they have an undue platform or an extra platform to speak to the community. It's that they're pretty distracted. Now, the distraction factor could be the same for anybody with a really tough job. So how do people feel about this? First of all, do we feel there should be some provision for this? Natasha, you haven't spoken. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that I feel very strongly about this. I think the moment somebody fills out the paperwork, they absolutely need to step off. I hadn't thought it through that, it would mean that they would be off for more than 3 months. But it's just what happened last year was really, in my opinion, unacceptable. So, yeah, I do feel that some provision needs to be made for this.
Do you want to give them a longer period of time? I mean, it could be as much as 6 months. Is that sufficient to say the person needs to step off the board, in your opinion?
Well, until the election or until if they decide to drop out of the race,
So you're okay giving them up as much time as they need to do that?
From the time you fill out the paperwork. Like normally, how long is it from the time you fill out the paperwork?
Well, it could be 6 months.
Could be 6 months.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, so Natasha, just officially, you since your hand was up. So are you okay with having whatever amount of time? Okay, I am too, because I think it's a serious commitment to take your level of public service up to a different level, and that you should be given that provision. You shouldn't have, leaving community board should not be a cost of doing that. Okay, thanks. Jay?
No, I was just going to say, you might want to take a look at the total time that candidates commit, because, you have primaries.
Right.
Then you have a general, it could be a year.
Okay, great. Barbara?
Yeah, I had trouble hearing Natasha, but I thought that people should also step down, leave the board because they're basically worthless for at least 6 months, and using the board as a stepping stone, I think, is wrong. So, once they've made that determination and filed paperwork, etc., I think getting off the board is the right step, the right thing to do.
Okay,
I
Bev?
don't know how other boards handle this, but
They don't address it. I think our board might be unusual in the number of people who have run for office. Bev?
I agree. That's appropriate. And if you'll excuse going back one step in this conversation, I would simply add to the leave-worthy reasons, bereavement and family responsibility.
That's in there.
um,
It's in there. Yeah,
which
absolutely.
aren't medical or professional. That's all.
Right. Okay.
mhm.
Well, that would come under personal.
Why not just call it family
That's fine.
instead of personal?
Okay. So we've got a bit of work more to do on that topic. Okay, moving on. 3K 4A2A. That's quite a notation. Public speakers limited to 3 minutes and must disclose that they live or work in the district or have any other relevant affiliation. The question here is, what the time limit should be for public speakers, whether we should have a time limit. Let's start there. I think, do we all agree we should have a time limit?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And then the question is just how long. And right now, I believe it's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. The question is how many minutes. City Council has got a 3-minute limit, and also in Albany, have a 3-minute limit. And all the electeds are actually, when they're not at a community board meeting, are able to stick to the 3-minute limit, amazingly enough. So that's something we might want to beef up in our timing monitoring in our board. But the question just was, do you want 2 minutes or 3 minutes? Natasha?
I think 3 minutes is fair. I did like the suggestion somebody made last night about putting up a clock on the screen. Like if you're in person, then some sort of a timer, physical timer. And I think even the elected, sometimes the problem is the electeds, they just come and keep going on and on. So I think as long as we have that visual reminder, we may get better results.
Yeah. Barbara?
2 minutes, and the second part of the sentence I think is extremely important. And I think that when they sign up, we should also require them to check whether they live in the district and what their affiliations are in terms of attending the meeting.
Great. Okay, Jay?
Yeah, I agree with Barbara, and I agree with 2 minutes.
Okay. So it's 2 minutes. Do we think there should be a limit for board members? We have a limit for public speakers. We have a limit for electeds, but there's no limit for board members. Jay?
I have mixed feelings about it because the circumstances often dictate. You have different circumstances when somebody has proposed a resolution or somebody is proposing an amendment to a resolution. I'm more inclined to, I think it might be good to put in some general language, but I think it's really, unfortunately for the chair, up to him or her to maintain it. I generally don't like it, and when we've attempted to do it, it's honored more in the breach than in compliance. So I'd like to leave it to the chair's discretion, or whoever's chairing the particular issue.
What we could do is we could say 3 minutes for members of the board at the discretion of the chair. Barbara?
Yes, absolutely. I do think that there should be time limitations. And I think that reading written statements, as some people do regularly, and they're lengthy, should be prohibited. And I think that board members should learn to focus their opinions so that they are succinct in what they have to say.
Thank you. Succinctly said. Thank you. Natasha?
Yeah, sometimes it's not the amount of time that they're speaking, but like a lot of times the back and forth and back and forth, it can be just very like sometimes get to an unproductive stage. So I don't know if you think it would be helpful to put in like how many times somebody can speak, or if that's just going back to kindergarten. Um, yeah, that was it. And also, yeah, the point that Barbara made about reading written statements or entire resolutions, like we're provided all that information ahead of time. Nobody needs to read that.
Yeah, yeah. I had a conversation with Stephen about that actually offline about the issue of, because there were some comments about that, about reading an entire resolution. And the issue is that it's a trade-off between the feeling that something's important and someone feels like they want to have it read into the record and have the community hear the detail. But the preferred way to approach this would certainly be to assume that everyone has done their homework, has read the resolution ahead of time, and that the resolutions that they're posted on the website, which I know we're working toward, or we already have done, right, Max? That then the public will be able to see this, and there'd be no need to read these things. And the preferred approach would be a summary of it, and then a couple salient points. Most committees do not read the entire resolution aloud, so that's certainly a one-off kind of thing. So I don't think that needs to be in the bylaws. Jay?
Susan, this is just for full board, right? Not committees,
Just full board.
just full board. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll make sure it says just a full board. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this is all at the chair's discretion, because obviously, as with the community session, if it's a 2-minute limit, but someone is telling a wrenching story, or is, it's very, whatever, something's going on, the chair is obviously not going to interrupt. I think the bigger area for improvement here, I think we might all agree, is, but I'm not sure, is the electeds, because the electeds have other platforms where they can speak. And if they're able to keep to a 3-minute limit in Albany and at City Council, they should be able to do that at our board meetings as well. Max?
And I think they have some difficulty because when we invite them, which we do each month, we make it clear in that invitation that they really should have about 2 minutes max, but they seem to go beyond. So firm rules on that could certainly be helpful.
Yeah, pardon the pun here, but I think for political reasons, in the past, board chairs have been reticent to criticize that or to cut them off. So now, Jay, before I call on you, I just want to make a point. Natasha, you asked about the back and forth. In the bylaws, it does say that you should speak only twice on a topic. So Jay, this will be your 3rd time speaking on this topic. What do you got?
I was just going to suggest you can think about, maybe we could, for as far as public officials, put a reference that their time shall be limited to that of their respective position, or that imposed by their respective body. If it says 3 minutes to talk in the city council, well, there you go. It's be difficult for them to object if it's.
Interesting. Okay.
Just think about it.
Thank you. It's an interesting idea. Okay. Okay. And the next one is 4A2, small a, chairperson limited to 1 2-year term and must wait 2 years before running again. And this actually dovetails with 4B1, small b, which is biannual elections. Now, this is a big change. And this is something that I got the idea for it from a couple other community boards. Spoke to Stephen about it. I've spoken to a couple other past chairs about it. The election process is very time consuming. On top of when you become chair, how time consuming that is. And I don't know if anybody's really been up close and personal with a board chair, but it's time consuming. So the idea here is, instead of our current 3 1-year terms with election every year, to go to an every other year election, so that the board and the entire board would be saved the trauma and the time of the election process. It would also give the chair, once they're appointed, a full 2 years to get their sea legs and then do whatever they want to do, build relationships, and then move on. And then by having them have to wait 2 years, another term before running again, it would provide opportunity for everybody to have a chance to be chair. So that's the proposal here. And I can take a look real quick and tell you which ones do it, but hold on a second. Every other year is board 1, 9, 10, and 11. and then they're all over the map otherwise. Natasha?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I totally agree with this change.
Great,
Really excited.
thank you. Jay?
Yeah, well, there are two issues here, though, Susan. There's the biennial elections, and as I understand it, your proposal is to then limit the board chair to one term, 1 2-year term.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just give you a quick history. The last bylaws task.
Jay, can you, without a history, we all know that where we are right now is, I'm sorry, is that.
Okay, all right, forget it. You know, I'll do this in 30 seconds. I'm
Okay, great.
against your proposal. I would agree on biennial elections, but not a 2-year limit. In the last task force, we raised the limit from 2 to 3 years. I don't want to go back to 2 years. I would support biennial elections with a limit of 2-year terms, because I agree a 2-year term is more appropriate. Thank you.
That was great. Let me just ask you though, so you'd be fine with 2 2-year terms
2-year terms.
instead of 1 2-year term? Okay, that'd be fine. Okay. That's great. So you're fine with the biennial, Lipscomb, biennial.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. And why do you not want to why do you want to have a second term? What
Well,
if somebody doesn't want to be chair for 4 years?
if someone doesn't want to be chair for 4 years, they don't have to run again.
Okay, great. Okay.
But I personally generally don't believe in term limits.
Okay, so the part you don't like here is they have to wait 2 years before running again.
Yes.
Okay, I'll take that out. That's fine. Bev?
Yeah, I'm assuming this would apply to all of the positions on the executive team as well.
Yes,
It's just to clarify that.
yes.
And then also there could be some provision that if somebody leaves office midterm, does that count as a year or not? I mean, we've had this obviously with Mark's departure. You
Yeah.
know, what happens to the rump end of a you know, of an elected position's term when somebody resigns midway? I think there's just needs to be something to clarify what counts as 2 terms. That's all.
Okay. Great point. Barbara?
Well, I think that the person should be elected for an interim term, and when the next 2-year term is up, there's no elections. And but I had a question regarding our current chair, because if these bylaws pass, what happens to Stephen? Because if he runs for election again, is he elected for another 2 years, or how do we handle that here?
The best way to do this, I believe, would be not to do it this year, but rather to do it in 2020, starting in 2023. So it gives everybody a chance to cycle out, because we're going to get to the issue of the treasurer and the 2 vice chairs. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. So if we started in 2023, it would give everybody a chance to cycle out. So we'd have one more 1-year election, and then we would have a start in 2023 with the 2-year cycle. Does that make sense?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Jay?
If I'm allowed to comment on what Barbara said, interim terms generally from the President of the United States down don't count as consecutive terms. It's just the way it's done. So if somebody fills it in the second year or the last couple of months or whatever, then they could, under this scenario, they could then run twice. So that's generally how it's done. And you can consider whether you want to deal with it other than that.
Okay. We've got 2 more topics, and they're sort of together. It's 4A3 small b and 4A3B4. And so it's the question of 2 vice chairs or 1 and the separate treasurer. So let me break this down a bit. So we had decided that we would like to have a treasurer. And that was Beverly's suggestion. And again, thank you so much for that. I think it's a great idea. We all did. The only issue is if we add a position, then we have an even number of people on the executive committee. And I've spoken to a number of past chairs about this and the current chair. And there's a concern, not only that it's even numbers, if you have a vote, it's a problem, but also that it's the logistics and the difficulty of getting 6 people together plus the chair. It's cumbersome. So the question was, could we maybe have only one vice chair? And then the question comes up, speaking to the current vice chairs, okay, what happens if the chair is not there and the first vice chair is not there, then who fills in? And so my proposed solution for that would be that that the treasurer takes on those second vice chair responsibilities and duties, which are not that onerous really. It'd be make a lot more sense rather than a suggestion somebody else had, which is giving the treasurer responsibilities to the second vice chair. Because the treasurer responsibilities are quite finely honed and specialized. And so that would be a different criteria when you're voting than it would be for second vice chair. Does that make sense? So the proposal here is get rid of one of the vice chairs, not by assassination right now while Doug Kleiman is in office, because we like Doug, but rather have the second vice chair term out and then have the next election, a biannual election, have only one vice chair and have a separate office of treasurer. Barbara?
I think that's a fine idea. I like the whole thing.
Phew, okay. Meeting adjourned. Jay?
I agree.
Meeting really adjourned. Okay.
I think I suggested that in one of my comments, that we do away with vice chair and have a separate treasurer.
Okay, great. And then the final thing is, Jay, you had mentioned about standing committee list. You feel very strongly about that. You want to have, oh, Beverly, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm glad to hear you weigh in on this. It's your topic.
Yeah, so just to be clear, you would add the treasurer in 2023?
We could add the treasurer right now, perhaps, and have a separate, we could talk about that. You'd rather add the treasurer now?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
it seems to me, at least at the
Interim.
next vote.
Yeah.
In the fall.
Yeah. So
that
you should add the
you'd want
treasurer.
to not
interim.
wait a year for that if you wanted to add the position.
That's a good idea. Thank you for catching that. I just have a quick question for the group. Can everybody hear the music that's coming from the apartment above us? They claim they're not blasting. Okay.
Yeah.
You're probably wondering how loud you have to have your music on at 11 in the morning. Okay. So Jay, the last topic was, unless there are other things, was the standing committee list, and most of the other boards do not have the standing committee listed. Let me just take a quick look here at my cheat sheet. Only 2 of them do, which is 11 and 12. I'm not in favor of it, as you can tell. I don't think it adds any benefit. It's on the website. I don't see what it adds. But does anybody have it, other than Jay's view is that we should have the standing committee list in here. I don't think we need it for protection, since we now would have the provision that the standing committees can only be dissolved with a majority vote at steering and notice in advance of the committee in question. Does anybody have a strong feeling either way?
Want me to comment, or you don't care?
Oh,
No, I didn't mean that to sound pathetic.
Oh, it sounded aggressive. No, no, I care.
No,
But let's let Barbara. You want to have
Listen, my main
Jay?
concern.
Let's let Barbara speak, because we all know that you're
Oh,
in
I'm
favor.
sorry.
You said it before. Let's have other people.
Yeah,
speak.
I'm not in favor of listing the committees. I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. Natasha.
Yeah, not in favor either.
Okay. Okay. Jay, time for rebuttal, briefly.
Well, this was done in 2 parts, and really the impetus for why I proposed it way back when was because of the situation that took place when the chair wanted to unilaterally dissolve. So that was really my main concern.
Okay,
was
so
to
we've
have
addressed
some
it.
check and balance. I prefer it. Robert's rules calls for it. All of the elected bodies, the Senate, the Assembly, the City Council, in their rules, which are equivalent to bylaws, they all list standing committees, but more important to me was the check and balance on the chair's action. So if the consensus is not to list them, then so be it.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, great. So if anybody has their calendars handy, could we pick a meeting for, as I said, I'm committed to making these changes and sending it out at the end of this weekend. And so anybody have any thoughts on next meeting? Would next Thursday be possible for folks? It's the 14th. It's the day before Good Friday, but at least we can get it over with. And that would give us time for yet another meeting before yes, Rich.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you might have a meeting that's not during the workday, because I noticed that almost no other board members have attended these meetings.
Unfortunately, the task forces tend to meet during the day, Rich. The seniors task force does as well. And I think the budget committee does as well. It's unfortunate, but there's so many evening meetings. It's tough to find a night that's free. I wish we could. Be more convenient for me, but that's what we're stuck with, kind of. Jay?
I didn't know, I mean, in terms of the suggestions, there was one, the first one I included, you had, the bylaws said that 7 absences shall be grounds for removal, and then you had language about subsequent action at the chair's discretion. If 7 absences are grounds for removal.
Okay, I took that out.
Why
I
is
took it
that
out. Jay, I took it out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Didn't see it.
Sorry, I wrote that back. Max?
Actually, we have on
Meeting on the 14th.
14th, we have the senior task force meeting at 10 a.m. on the 14th. But if we wanted to move it to like 11:15 or something like that, it could be done the
I thought they
15th.
just met. I thought they just met.
Senior task force.
Yeah.
They hold one official meeting and then one planning meeting where it's just like a
Oh.
pre-call. You may think of that one.
Okay. So
Is that planning meeting online? Is there any reason why we can't share that time slot?
Oh, we could. It's not for all of the members of the task force. It's mostly just Barbara and like whoever's presenting. It's like a pre-call to kind of coordinate.
Oh.
What
Who's Barbara? No, you don't mean me, do you?
Yeah, no, I don't. Sorry, I'm getting everything mixed up today a little bit.
Roberta?
No, I'm looking at you. Yeah, Roberta.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Is that a phone call or is it a Zoom call?
Sometimes it's phone, sometimes it's Zoom.
So if they're not using Zoom, could we do it at 10 a.m. on the 14th?
If they're not using Zoom, yes, I'll double check with Roberta. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll figure it out today. How about that?
Okay. Natasha?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say the 14th works for me.
Excellent. Okay, so let's say the 14th, either 10 or 11:15. How's that?
If it can't be 10, could it be some other day maybe, or?
I guess the 18th,
We're talking about May now, right?
April.
April 18 is no good for me.
The 19th. Barbara, I'd like to reserve that following week for the second meeting, another backup meeting. So can let's say 10 or 11:15 on Thursday as an exception. Can you make that work?
Okay.
Thanks.
On the 14th?
On the 14th. So let's hold 10 a.m. or 11:15 a.m. on the
Okay.
14th. And then why don't we say the 20th or the 21st? How about the 21st?
And I'll get back to everyone
Yeah.
as end of day today on
Okay,
everything.
great. Natasha, is that good for you, the 21st?
What day of the week is that, Susan?
You cannot make that day?
No, I say, what day of the week is that?
It's a Thursday, the 21st.
They're
Yeah,
both
that's fine.
Thursdays, okay.
Natasha, good for you? Barbara?
Yeah.
Okay, bylaws. And there's no conflict with that, right, Max?
I might have a conflict with it. I'd be happy to do these meetings really early, like 9 is better for me than 10, certainly better than 11. It just really breaks up the day.
I agree with that. Cuts into bird watching. Anybody else mind moving it to 9?
9 is good also for me.
9 is what, Natasha?
9 is good.
Okay, so should we do 9 on the 14th then? We'll get away from the problem.
Okay with me.
Works on our calendar, yeah.
Okay, so 9 a.m. on the 14th and then 9 a.m. on the 21st. Great. And
We have two meetings then?
yes, the one of the 21st is just a provisional one in case we haven't sorted everything out.
Okay.
Rich, to your point about, other people joining in, I have sent out several emails to the entire board asking for input. We have gotten almost no input. So I would hope that people would take advantage of that. I know we're looking for it, we're soliciting it, we're just not getting it. So I would hope that people would. And then, Jay, I'll take a look at how we can address your issue of wanting to vote on this section by section. But what I want to urge folks to do is to try at this point to take more of a 20,000-foot view on this thing. And, we've gone through it word by word by word through the whole thing together as a group. So at this point, I'd like to just focus on, the content of it and making sure that we're all in agreement on the content of it. Natasha? No? Prior raised hand? Okay. Rich?
Yeah, and I have to leave now because I had a meeting that I had at 10 that I pushed back to 11 and we've gone over. But in terms of getting input, my understanding is you haven't shared the revisions you've only shared the draft that the borough president created. You haven't shared any of the revisions that you've made to that draft. So no one's been able to give any comment to anything that's been discussed in the committee or in the task force.
Yeah, that's not the process we're following. What we're following is the committee's still working on it. What we're asking for is input. If people have any views on the bylaws whatsoever, people know what the issues are, whether or not it's, whatever the topics are. If they have any views on what they want in the bylaws, they're free to reach out to us and say.
But they can't comment on anything that's been discussed in any of the meetings.
Excuse me.
All right, and I have to leave. I have another meeting.
Oh, can I answer your question? I guess not. Okay, then. Deb, once again, thanks so much for reaching out with your suggestion, even though you haven't seen the working draft, to talk about the idea that we might need to add a treasurer. It's a great suggestion. It's led to a lot of fruitful discussion. Jay, I'm sorry if I've been a little bit short. We're trying really hard to get this finished. I appreciate everybody's input on this and look forward to seeing you all on the 14th, which is less than a week from now, at 9 a.m. Same Zoom channel. Thanks so much.
Okay, and Susan, you will be sending us the draft when you do it.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Great. Thanks,
I'll
guys.
get it posted on the website.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.